Linda Patterson sat in her small studio apartment in Gresham, a cheaper suburb east of Portland, staring at her laptop screen. The unemployment benefits application mocked her with its questions about previous employment and reason for separation. How was she supposed to explain that she'd been fired for discrimination, that her 23-year career in property management had ended with a lawsuit and a permanent ban from the industry? It had been 3 months since the settlement, 3 months since her face had been plastered across local news websites, 3 months since former colleagues stopped returning her calls and property management groups removed her from their professional networks. She'd tried applying for other jobs, retail positions, administrative work, even customer service roles at call centers, but every background check revealed the lawsuit. Every interview ended with uncomfortable questions about why she'd left her last position, and every potential employer decided they didn't want the liability of someone with a discrimination case in their history. Linda had spent the first month in denial, convinced she'd been set up, that James Carter had entrapped her, that the city had manufactured evidence, that she was the real victim in all of this. But during the second month, as her savings dwindled and reality set in, she'd been forced to review the evidence her attorney had shared, the recordings of her interactions with James, the comparison charts showing how she'd treated white tenants versus tenants of color, the pattern that was so obvious when laid out objectively, and slowly, painfully, she'd begun to see it, the assumptions she'd made, the different standards she'd applied, the way she'd perceived Black and Latino tenants as problems before they'd done anything wrong. She'd told herself she was just being thorough, maintaining standards, protecting the property. But the evidence showed something else. It showed bias. It showed discrimination. It showed her own internalized prejudices manifesting in dozens of small decisions that had harmed real people. Now in month 3, Linda was trying to figure out what to do with that knowledge. Acknowledging her mistakes didn't erase them. Understanding her bias didn't undo the harm. And accepting responsibility didn't change the fact that her career was over and her reputation destroyed. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister. "Saw your resume on Indeed. Have you thought about taking that implicit bias training I mentioned? It might help with job applications." Linda stared at the message. Her first instinct was defensiveness. She didn't need training. She'd learned her lesson. But then she thought about the past 3 months, about how little she'd actually done beyond feeling sorry for herself. She typed back, "Send me the information." Meanwhile, James Carter was preparing for his 18th undercover investigation. This time the target was a property management company in southeast Portland that had received complaints about discriminatory application denials. Black and Latino applicants with good credit and stable employment were being rejected while white applicants with worse qualifications were approved. James sat in his office at the Portland Bureau of Development Services, reviewing application data. His supervisor, Rachel Kim, sat across from him. "This one's going to be trickier," Rachel said. "They're not managing their own properties. They're a third-party screening service that makes recommendations to landlords. Proving discrimination means showing pattern and practice across multiple properties." James nodded. "Which means I'll need to apply to several units, document each rejection, and compare my results with white testers applying to the same properties." "Exactly. And it'll take longer. Probably 3 to 4 months of applications before we have enough data." "I'm ready," James said. "How many complaints have we received?" Rachel pulled up her files. 47 over the past 2 years, all from qualified applicants of color who were rejected for apartments they should have gotten. Some of them ended up homeless because they couldn't find housing. This isn't just discrimination, it's contributing to our housing crisis. James felt the familiar weight of responsibility. His work mattered. Every investigation, every case, every property manager held accountable meant real people got justice and future tenants were protected. His phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something made him answer. "Is this James Carter?" A woman's voice, hesitant and nervous. "Yes. Who's calling?" "This is Linda Patterson. I don't know if you remember me." James sat up straighter. "I remember you, Miss Patterson." Silence on the line. Then, "I wanted to apologize. For real this time, not the half-hearted apology my lawyer made me give during the settlement. I wanted to say I was wrong, about how I treated you, about how I treated so many tenants, about everything." James didn't respond immediately. He'd received apologies before from people he'd investigated, usually motivated by legal strategy or public relations. but something in Linda's voice sounded different, raw, genuine. "I appreciate you calling," James said carefully. "What prompted this?" "I've spent 3 months unemployed, reviewing what I did, seeing the evidence clearly for the first time, and I realized I destroyed my own career by refusing to see my own biases. But more than that, I hurt people, real people, families, and I need to acknowledge that." Linda's voice cracked. "I know you probably don't care about my apology. You were doing your job, protecting tenants, but I needed to say it anyway. You were right about all of it." James was quiet for a moment. "Miss Patterson, have you taken any steps to address your biases? Training, education, anything? I'm enrolled in an implicit bias workshop that starts next week, and I've been volunteering with a fair housing advocacy group, doing administrative work. I can't be in property management anymore, but I can maybe help people who've been discriminated against." James was surprised. That's good. I'm glad you're doing that work." "I don't expect forgiveness," Linda said quickly, "and I know I can't undo the harm I caused. But I wanted you to know that your investigation changed me, not because I got caught, but because it forced me to see the truth about myself, and I'm trying to be better." After the call ended, James sat thinking. He'd conducted 17 investigations before Linda Patterson. Some of the property managers he'd exposed had fought the charges, claimed innocence, blamed others. A few had issued pro forma apologies, designed to minimize legal liability. But none had called him months later to express genuine remorse and describe concrete steps toward change. He didn't know if Linda's transformation was permanent. People backslid. Change was hard. But her willingness to acknowledge harm and do the work suggested maybe, possibly, she was serious. Rachel poked her head into his office. "Everything okay? You look deep in thought." James shook his head. "Just processing something unexpected. I'm good. Good because we need to finalize your cover identity for the screening company investigation." James pulled his focus back to the work ahead. "Right, let's do it." 5 months later, James's investigation of the screening company concluded with damning evidence. They'd rejected his applications despite excellent credit, stable employment, and strong references, while white testers with worse qualifications were approved. The pattern was undeniable. The case resulted in a $2 million settlement, changes to the company's screening algorithms, mandatory fair housing training for all staff, and ongoing monitoring by the city. James was featured in a Portland Tribune article about the city's Undercover fair housing program. The piece detailed his work, explaining how these investigations uncovered discrimination that couldn't be proven through conventional means. Linda Patterson read the article in the waiting room of the Portland Housing Bureau, where she now volunteered 3 days a week, helping tenants file discrimination complaints. She'd completed her implicit bias training and was working with a therapist to understand the roots of her prejudices. She'd also joined a restorative justice program, meeting with some of the former Riverside Apartments tenants she'd harassed. Those conversations had been painful, hearing firsthand how her actions had affected their lives, their sense of safety, their ability to feel at home in their own apartments. One tenant, Marcus Williams, had told her, "You made me feel like I didn't deserve to exist in that building. Every violation notice, every unannounced inspection, every time you looked at me with suspicion, it reinforced that I was less than, that I was a problem to be managed, rather than a person to be respected." Linda had apologized, acknowledging specifically what she'd done and the harm it caused. Marcus had accepted her apology, but made clear it didn't erase the damage. "I had to move out," he'd said. "I couldn't live somewhere I was treated that way. Your actions had real consequences." Now volunteering at the Housing Bureau, Linda encountered people dealing with the same discrimination she'd once perpetrated. She heard their stories, helped them document violations, connected them with resources, and every day she was reminded of the person she'd been and the person she was trying to become. One afternoon, a young black woman came in with her 2 children. She'd been evicted from her apartment after complaining about discriminatory treatment from her landlord. She had nowhere to go, no family in Portland, and limited resources. Linda spent 2 hours with her, helping her file a complaint, connecting her with emergency housing resources, and walking her through her legal options. As the woman left with her children, she turned back to Linda. "Thank you. Really, you didn't have to spend so much time helping us." Linda felt tears threaten but kept her voice steady. "Yes, I did, and I hope you find a good home, a place where you're treated with dignity." After the woman left, Linda sat at her desk, thinking about the people she'd evicted from Riverside Apartments. How many of them had been in similar situations? How many had struggled to find new housing? How many had suffered because of her actions? She couldn't undo the past, but she could work toward a better future. 2 years after the Riverside Apartments investigation, James was promoted to Director of Fair Housing Investigations for the Portland Bureau of Development Services. His work had resulted in 23 successful cases, recovered over $4 million for victims of discrimination, and led to systemic changes in how Portland enforced fair housing laws. He was invited to speak at a national conference on fair housing enforcement. Standing at the podium in front of hundreds of housing officials from across the country, James shared what he'd learned. Discrimination in housing has evolved, he began. It's rarely overt. You won't find landlords openly refusing to rent to people of color. Instead, it's selective enforcement. It's manufactured violations. It's different standards applied to different tenants. And it's incredibly difficult to prove through traditional investigations. He showed slides documenting his undercover work. This is why we go undercover, because the discrimination only reveals itself when property managers think no one in authority is watching, when they believe there are no consequences. A question came from the audience. What happens to the property managers you expose? Do they ever change? James thought about Linda Patterson's phone call, about the work she was doing now. Some do, he said honestly. Some never accept responsibility and just get better at hiding their biases. But a few, when forced to confront the evidence of their actions, actually do the work to change. It's rare, but it happens. Another question, is it worth it? The time, the resources, the complexity of undercover operations. James didn't hesitate. Absolutely, because housing isn't just about having a roof over your head. It's about dignity, security, belonging. When people are discriminated against in housing, it affects every aspect of their lives, their ability to build wealth, their children's education, their physical and mental health. So yes, it's worth it. The conference ended with other cities expressing interest in developing similar undercover investigation programs. James spent the next several months consulting with housing officials across the country, sharing protocols, training materials, and lessons learned. The work was exhausting but meaningful. Every new investigation program meant more protection for tenants. Every property manager held accountable, sent a message that discrimination had consequences. 3 years after the investigation, Linda Patterson had rebuilt her life in small ways. She'd found steady work as an administrative assistant at a non-profit serving homeless families. She continued volunteering with fair housing organizations, and she'd become an unexpected advocate, speaking at property management conferences about how to recognize and address bias. Her story was uncomfortable. Property managers didn't like hearing from someone who'd been sued and banned from the industry. But her willingness to own her mistakes and describe her journey toward accountability was powerful. I spent 23 years in property management, Linda would tell audiences, and I thought I was good at my job. But I was discriminating against tenants of color the entire time. I just couldn't see it because I'd convinced myself my actions were about maintaining standards rather than about prejudice. She'd show the evidence from her case. These charts show how I treated white tenants versus black and Latino tenants. Same behaviors, completely different responses. And I did this for years without questioning it. The audiences were often hostile at first. Some property managers accused her of being a traitor, of making the industry look bad. But others listened, recognizing patterns in their own practices, acknowledging uncomfortable truths about how they made decisions. One manager approached her after a presentation. I think I've been doing some of what you described, not intentionally, but the patterns are there. What should I do? Linda didn't sugarcoat it. Start by acknowledging it, then get training. Review your policies and practices for disparate impact. And most importantly, create accountability systems so you can't hide from the truth. These conversations were hard. They required Linda to relive her mistakes repeatedly, to face hostility from former colleagues, to acknowledge that she'd caused real harm. But she kept doing it because maybe, possibly, it would prevent others from making the same mistakes. 5 years after being evicted from Riverside Apartments as part of an undercover investigation, James Carter stood in the lobby of a new affordable housing development in northeast Portland. The building was the result of a city initiative he'd helped shape, using lessons from his investigations to design fair housing policies into the development process. The building had 150 units reserved for low-income families. The property management company had been carefully selected based on their fair housing track record, and the lease agreements included robust protections against discrimination. James was there for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. As he looked around at the diverse families who'd be moving into these apartments, he felt a sense of accomplishment. This building existed because of years of investigation work, policy advocacy, and systemic change. Rachel Kim, now his deputy director, stood beside him. "You should be proud," she said. "This building is a direct result of your work." James smiled. "Our work, the whole team's work.
Still, you were the one willing to live in apartments, document discrimination, and put yourself in potentially hostile situations. That took courage. James shrugged. It took necessity. People were being harmed. Someone had to document it. As the ceremony began, James noticed a familiar face in the crowd. Linda Patterson stood near the back, wearing a volunteer badge from one of the fair housing organizations that had helped develop this project. Their eyes met. Linda gave a small nod of acknowledgement. James nodded back. After the ceremony, Linda approached him cautiously. "Mr. Carter, I wasn't sure if I should come today, but I've been volunteering with the Fair Housing Council, and they invited me. It's good you're here," James said. "This building represents what housing should be. Accessible, fair, dignified." Linda looked at the building. "I think about Riverside Apartments a lot, about the tenants I hurt, and I see buildings like this, and I think about how I could have been part of creating something positive instead of something harmful. You're part of creating something positive now," James pointed out. "The work you're doing matters." Linda's eyes filled with tears. "It doesn't undo the harm." "No," James agreed. "It doesn't. But it's still worth doing." They stood in silence for a moment. Two people whose lives had intersected through conflict, but who now, in different ways, were working toward the same goal. "Thank you," Linda said quietly, "for holding me accountable. I know that sounds strange, thanking someone for exposing your discrimination, but if you hadn't, I'd still be hurting people, and I'd never have done the work to become better." James considered his response carefully. Accountability isn't punishment, it's an opportunity. Some people waste that opportunity. You didn't. That matters. Linda wiped her eyes. "I should go, but I wanted you to know that your work, what you do, it changes more than just policies. It changes people. At least it changed me." She walked away, back to her volunteer group, back to the work of trying to make amends. James watched her go, thinking about the complexity of justice. Linda had caused real harm. She'd lost her career rightfully. But she'd also done something many people caught in wrongdoing never do. She'd accepted responsibility, changed her behavior, and dedicated herself to repair. Was that redemption? James wasn't sure, but it was something. It was movement in the right direction. And in the work of fighting discrimination, every bit of progress mattered.
Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.